Welcome to my video on proportions. So we're going to review some vocabulary and then I'm going to show you how to set up and solve a proportion. So a ratio is a comparison of two numbers by division. An equivalent ratio would be two ratios that have the same value, because equivalent means equals. So they have an equal value. Rate, a ratio of two quantities measured in different units. An example would be miles per hour. And then finally, our key word for today is proportion. And a proportion is two equal ratios. In a proportion, the cross products are equal. Okay, simplifying ratios. Do not write as mixed numbers. This has no meaning as a ratio. So a mixed number has no meaning as a ratio. So now let's look at some examples where we could set up a proportion to solve it. Now, keep in mind, when we're setting up a proportion here, there are other ways to set it up and solve this. But I want you to be able to set up a proportion for these, and then as well as the ones on the classwork and the homework. So Mandy is paid an hourly rate. 1 week she earned $157.50, so we're going to underline this, by working 25 hours. So underline that whole section there. If she works 40 hours the next week, how much will she earn? So underline that. So when we're setting up a proportion, we need to know the two units that we're discussing here. And so we have money and hours. So I'm going to put money over hours. I'm going to draw an arrow to where I'm going to set up the proportion. So we have 157.50 divided by 25. And then we want to know how much for 40 hours. So if they're getting the same rate for 40 hours, then we can set up a proportion where we're going to put 40 on the bottom, because now we have money over hours, and we don't know how much money 40 hours is going to be, so we can put in X. And since the proportion is two equal ratios, then I can use the cross products to solve it. Now what you might be thinking here is you could do money divided by hours, and that would give you how much they would make per hour, and then you could multiply that by 40, which is essentially what we're going to do with the proportion in a roundabout way. So 25 times X is 25X. And we're going to say that equals 157.50 times 40 is 6,300. And the opposite of multiplication is division, so we're going to divide both sides by 25. 25 divided by 25 is a 1 in disguise. And 6,300 divided by 25 is $252. Now, my question is that the only way to set up this proportion? And the answer is no. So I'm going to show you another way to set this up, and I want you to write it down, but we're not going to solve it because we already have the answer. So we did money over hours, but you could also do hours over money. And watch how this proportion looks. So we know that 25 hours, they make 157, 157.50. And we want to know 40 hours makes how much? Circle the number diagonal to the x, and what do you notice? Hopefully you notice the same number is diagonal to the x. Therefore, this is another way to write a proportion for this word problem. And if you look at it closely, all this is just the flip of this one. So are there even more ways to write this? And the answer is yes. Now I could do hours over hours, money over money, as long as I have the hours that go with the money across from each other. So I could write, follow me here, 25 over 40 equals 157.50 over x, and I would still have the 25 diagonal to the x. Okay. I could also write this 40 over x equals 25 over 157.50. That would be another way. It would just I would move this over to this side. So as long as 25 is diagonal to the x, any of those would work. Any of those proportions that had the 25 diagonal to the x would work for number 1. So there are several different ways to write a proportion for the same problem. And you're going to see on your classwork, whenever you have multiple choice proportions, you're always going to want to write your own first so that you can look at the number diagonal to the x and the one that you write and try to match it up. Because the one that you write isn't always the one that's listed in multiple choice. All right, let's look at number 2. In 3 hours, 225 cases of corn can be canned. So let's underline that. At that rate, how many cases of corn can be canned in 8 hours? So what are our 2 units here? We have hours and cans. And we know that 3 hours can make 225 cans. And I want to know how many cans can be made in 8 hours. So 8 over x, because I don't know how many cans are going to be made in 8 hours. That's what I want to find out. So now I circle the number diagonal to the x. So 3 times x is 3x. 225 times 8 is 1,800. And the opposite of multiplication is division, so I'm going to divide both sides by 3. 3 divided by 3 is a 1 in disguise. And 1,800 divided by 3 is 600. So we're going to write 600 cases. Now, could I have written this a different way? Yes, I could have written 225 over 3 and x over 8. That would be cases over hours. I could have also done cases over cases, 225 over x, 3 over 8. And no matter what proportion I write, I will always have the 3 diagonal to the x if it's a correct proportion. Okay, go ahead and turn the page and let's look at the examples on the back. Number 3, a plane traveled 1,900 kilometers in 2 hours. At that rate, how far will the plane travel in 3 hours? So what are our 2 units here? Good, we have kilometers and we have hours. So I'm going to put 1,900 over 2. So 1,900 kilometers in 2 hours. I want to know how far in 3 hours. So I put kilometers over hours, kilometers over hours. I'm consistent with my setup. Now, circle the number diagonal to the x. So 2 times x is 2x. And 1,900 times 3 is 5,700. The opposite of multiplication is division, so we're going to divide both sides by 2. 2 divided by 2 is a 1 in disguise, so cancel those out. And 5,700 divided by 2 is 2,850 kilometers. If you think you have a pretty good handle, you can go ahead and pause the video and do 4 and 5 on your own. But remember, when you turn the video back on to check it, you might have a different proportion than me. Just make sure you have the correct answer. Okay, if you pause the video, welcome back, and let's see how you did on number 4 and number 5. A duplicated machine can produce 50 copies in 2 minutes. At that rate, how long will it take to produce 150 copies? So what are my two units? Copies and minutes. So I chose to do copies over minutes, so I'm going to do 50 over 2. And I want to know how many minutes for 150 copies. So I need to put the 150 copies on top and the X on the bottom. Now you may have done minutes over copies. So you may have done 2 over 50, X over 150. That's okay. As long as your proportion has 50 diagonal to the X, you should be good. So 50 times X is 50X. And 150 times 2 is 300. My final step is to get X by itself, so I have to divide both sides by 50, and that was a really horrible division bar. 50 divided by 50 is a 1 in disguise, so cancel. And 300 divided by 50 is 60. Sorry, not 60, 6 minutes. 6 minutes. 300 divided by 50 is 6, and my label is minutes. Okay, number 5. 6 cases of merchandise weighs 180 pounds. So 6 cases weighs 180 pounds. How much would 10 cases weigh? So our units are cases and pounds. So we know that 6 cases weighs 180 pounds. And we want to know how many 10 cases weighs. So we're going to put an X in the pounds. Now you may have set it up pounds over cases. That's fine. As long as your proportion has 6 diagonal to the X, you should be good. 6 times X is 6X. 10 times 180 is 1800. And the opposite of multiplication is division, so we can divide both sides by 6. 6 divided by 6 is a 1 in disguise. And 1800 divided by 6 is 300 pounds. So the important thing to remember when you're setting this up is to make sure your answer makes sense, your final answer makes sense, and when you're setting these up, make sure you're consistent. This labeling technique is helpful to get your setup correct so you know you're consistent. And if you're going to go cases over pounds, you have to make sure you do cases over pounds on both sides. That concludes our notes on proportions. I hope you have a great day.